Hello, hello. Good to see you all tonight.
Good to see you, Ken.
Good to see you. I want to welcome all of our viewers. We have David with us tonight, and again tonight, and then of course Dr. Ricks and Ken at this end. And we are transmitting from a undisclosed secret location. Sometimes it's so secret even I can't find it. So. So tonight we're going to go part 2 on Christmas. And we're also, if we have time, we're going to talk a little more about the 10 Kings and maybe a little news if we get to that point. So if you would like to start us out, Dr. Ricks.
A little levity to lighten the heart. Why are calendars so popular? Because they have lots of dates. What do you call the soft tissue between a shark's teeth? The slow swimmers. I read that mass chicken farms pump chickens full of antibiotics. Maybe that's why chicken noodle soup is so good for us when we have a cold. Okay, now we're going to go through a little history lesson. Men, 1845, they'd shoot a buffalo. Men, 1952, they'd fix the roof. Men, 2016, they'd shave their legs.
And they wear them little buns. I don't get what's with the bun. Somebody explain where that came from.
I saw a guy and girl walking through the parking lot. Both of them had the same hair with a little bun on their head.
Okay, I know that's a tough one to digest.
How do you know who anymore?
Shaved legs, right? Oh, I was going to say which restroom they used, but I thought, well, I'd stay out of trouble. How long does it take a Russian to reach the blood alcohol level of 0.8? About 2 days of no drinking. Why do people never eat clocks? It's so time consuming. Okay. We ought to wrap it up with just with a business story. Since we're all in the business. A student at a management school came up to a pretty girl and hugged her without any warning. The surprised girl says, "What was that all about?" He said, "Direct marketing." She slapped him. He said, "Why did you do that?" Customer feedback. Okay, the final one is a really short one. I called the hospital and the line was dead.
Oh.
You know, I don't have a joke, but I got a little bit of trivia I seen. You know, New York, they have they don't want to sell large sodas, so you had to buy a small, like a 16-ounce soda or something most you could buy. But they're not the only state that does that. You know what state allows or only allows you to buy the smallest amount of soda? Minnesota.
Ah! Mini
I'm
soda.
sorry.
That's
Was that
a good one. Mini
Dave, don't look
soda.
at me like that. Don't look at me like that.
No, I can't bear to look at you after that one.
Oh, we're in a good mood tonight, right?
Now that all of our viewers have dropped off, we might as well keep going.
I said, what happened? Well, you remember last week we talked about the cycle, how you could prove that Christ was not born on December 25th or even close to that. It was almost certainly in the fall. We went through the order of the priests, summer time, 6 months from that would be when Christ was conceived. And all those things are like I think it was Dave talked about, if he's 33 and a half years old, he died in the Passover, then his birthday, because half year has to be 6 months one way or the other, from roughly April 1st Passover, which again puts you in the fall, and other proofs. And then we said, well, where did the date come from? We talked about pagan Rome and the Saturnalia. And I said, really, when you get down to it, scholars do not debate that date is false, not the real ones. They know that the Catholic Church used that. We'll put it this way. If it was a real great time of drinking, revelry, in some cases orgies, a lot of fun, if they wanted to Christianize pagan Rome, they had to let them keep their favorite celebration of the sun worship. So it's sort of like Christianity at different holy days, and it's much different. And suddenly it becomes the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. And it changed. And from the Holy Roman Empire, it got into the Roman Catholic Church, which is an image of the Holy Roman Empire. And commercialism is how it came down to us today. So the question is, where did it really come from? Where did the Romans get it? Where did they get the date in late December for sun worship? Where did they get the date, at least some of the customs? Where did they get this pagan customs from? And we've got a long article here, but basically, obviously the pagan cultures go backwards and backwards in history, but it goes back to a period just a few generations after the flood, when the world was united by one leader who was in place of God, and that was Nimrod, the mighty hunter. And of course, the Tower of Babel was built. And you know much of that story of Babylon and the Babylonish religion. Well, the heart of that religion was Nimrod, who married his mother, Semiramis. And when he died, she claimed that this dead stump of a tree would come back to life with a new big tree that represented Nimrod coming back to life. And it was also mother, father, and son. It was a triad. And that's where the basis for sun worship began, with Nimrod, Semiramis, and Babylon. Semiramis is also the queen of heaven. She has a number of other names from other cultures, but Queen of Heaven is one of the big ones that you will see in the Bible as well. What do you think, John?
Well, absolutely. And, we live in a pretty well ready-made world. All of us do at one time or another. We didn't have any part in customizing it to suit our own tastes, and it was already laid out for us with our holidays and customs that all of us were taught as kids. Most of us. Some of you were born into the Church of God, didn't go through that. Others of us did. And one thing he always wanted to keep from me was the fact there was no Santa Claus. Now, wasn't that disappointing? but talking about where it came from, the Encyclopedia Britannica admits that before the 5th century, there was no general consensus of opinion as to when the Epiphany, they call it, should come in the calendar. Whether it was on the 6th of January, the March 25th, or December 25th. It's all confused. So Origen, one of the so-called, the church fathers, these are the ante-Nicene fathers to scholars. These are the writings of nominal Christian thought that lived prior to the Nicene Council of 325 AD. They repudiated the very idea of, as they wrote, keeping the birthday of Christ as if he were a king pharaoh. Apparently, the very first mention of the idea of attaching December 25th to the birth of Christ came in about 354 AD. That's about 320 years after Christ sent the Holy Spirit to build his true church. And then I'm quoting from looking at secular things, because that's where I counter the argument of Christmas with people in this manner. And the Britannica 11th edition states that in Britain, the 25th of December was a festival long before the conversion to Christianity, and therefore a pagan festival. And the pagans called it the Mother's Night. This may be very significant. And the Puritans in England, as late as 1644, by an act of Parliament, declared Christmas on December 25th to be a heathen festival. And to show their contempt, they ordered people to fast on that day. Actually, their descendants outlawed any celebration of the pagan December 25th celebration in New England up until actually about 1870. So that is quite something. Now, how much the date of the festival depended upon the pagan Rumalia, that's December 25th. Following the Saturnalia, which is December 17th to 24th, and celebrating the shortest day of the year in the new sign. The pagan Saturnalia and Brumalia were too deeply entrenched in popular custom to be set aside by Christian influence. So when the apostate church, the Catholic Church, got into this, they didn't do anything about it. In fact, they adapted it because it was too popularly entrenched to be set aside by any, Christian influence, so to speak. So the pagan festival had riot and merrymaking was so popular with the heathen anyway, that Christians were glad of an excuse to continue its celebration with little in spirit and in manner. Sure looks like today, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in some ways, they could almost say the Son of God, S-O-N, was somewhat similar to the Son of God, S-U-N, which is the Babylonian version of it. But see how they could almost, one, the other, they're almost the same. Let's keep doing what we do.
Yeah.
It's a theory. I've often wondered this. I'm not saying I know all the details, but when you look at the people in England who are really righteous, what did you call them again? The name is
the Puritans. The
Puritans, yeah. And all the Puritan leaders, and I don't remember all their names right now, but they'll come to me after I'm off the air. But the Puritans brought a religious pure revival, based on the Bible, to England. How did England get back to Christmas? I think a lot of it had to do with the book, The Christmas Carol. Ah, humbug. Entertainment is the best way to sell something. And it's almost as if, and maybe they rejected the Puritan for political reasons. People got tired of all the Puritan stuff. But also, I think when that book came out, it helped convince a lot of English people that if you didn't like Christmas, you were a Scrooge. They used popular literature to vilify the Puritan attitude toward Christmas. And I think, but isn't that what Hollywood is doing to America?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
You talked about the Puritans, and I asked online if anybody had any good research. I asked on Facebook, and I believe it was Dawn. Apologize if I got your name wrong, but I'm pretty sure her name was Dawn that sent me some things, and one of them was in 1958. And this is well after the Puritans. Reverend Paul Nedergaard, a clergyman in Copenhagen, Denmark. I don't know if you've heard of this guy or not, but he attracted a bunch of controversy when he declared Santa to be a pagan goblin. And that's translated from Danish, the word goblin, I guess.
Yeah.
His image was used on fundraising materials for a Danish welfare organization. So it's even more recent. We've heard some of the stirrings of people not going, hand in hand with this stuff. But and she gave several other examples as well. So just talking about how this has been over the years, and in that was also the research on the Puritans that we've all seen before, that the controversy is out there, and right now it seems to be less and less controversy. Everybody knows. Ever since the internet, there's no doubt. People know it. They don't care.
Exactly.
They just don't care.
The thing I get is my people that I deal with will walk in and say, I know you don't celebrate Christmas, but I do. So here's a present and you have to accept it. They don't say it quite that. Well, the one kid's mom did, but they don't say it quite that aggressively. But where they have a little 5-year-old walk in and give it to you, and what are you going to do? Hurt the little 5-year-old's feelings, put you in a spot. And that's difficult because I don't want to accept that behavior.
That's right.
And when I was a kid not keeping it, the abuse was unbelievable from the other kids and sometimes teachers as well. That Grinch TV, that cartoon come out, and the kids would come to school, and I was the Grinch for several weeks, and you really are a fool. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. And that was acceptable behavior, which really made it easier for me to dislike Christmas as an adult the rest of my life. They just pushed me deeper into the church. So
you were bah humbug.
I was pretty picked on at times. And the teacher would fail you. They'd give you work to do, and you'd fill out, 1 + 3 is 4, and you color all the 4s green, and all the way. Next thing you know, you've colored Santa Claus or a Christmas tree or a jack-o'-lantern or whatever it was. So I wouldn't color them in. I'd do the math, and she'd say it's only 50%. You fail.
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't color it. So,
it's funny. It's obvious if they put Christmas in the school lessons and they abuse kids and don't keep it, that's the wrong use of Christmas. Nobody would doubt that.
Well, there is no right use of Christmas. So
yeah, that's the wrong use. What worries me now a little bit is society is they're keeping the Christmas break and all the Christmas gift giving and partying and drinking. They're keeping all that stuff, but they're saying we can't have any mention of God in the public square. And that always, I wonder if we're going from bad to worse. And I guess that is the question. What will it lead to?
Well, you can't put Christ in Christmas because he was never there in the first place.
I understand.
And
That's the bothersome part.
Mm-hmm.
One of the major political parties, somebody mentioned God's name 4 years ago, and the entire auditorium booed.
Yeah, that's what worries me. I mean, there's no way God's going to bless a country that does that. I'm not saying God is every little thing that goes bad. God is going to ignore all the good people and zap us all. But let's face it, that kind of behavior is not what we want. And we want God to bless the nation. And I couldn't believe it when they booed God. And then, by the way, I saw it on cable TV, and I looked at some of the people in the audience, the way they dressed and their hairstyle. There are some party delegates that look pretty way out. You'd be a bit shocked if you saw them.
Yeah, those hippies that were dropping acid in the 60s are now running the country. So do the math.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Inmates are running the asylum.
I had a guy argue with me about marijuana, and I said, I don't think it should be legal because they can use marijuana for experiments or anything they need now. And his real argument was he wants to smoke pot. And so his argument was that because he had smoked so much of it in his life that he knew more about it and he was more qualified to make decisions about it. than I was because I never did it. And I said, so you've damaged your brain and that makes you more qualified to tell me about it. So that upset him. You know?
By the way, did we look at 2:8 last time? That scripture. I have on my notes, that's where we left off, but maybe we ought to put it up just one more time as we move along in the listing, because it's a simple one, but well worth considering. Well worth considering. Luke 2:8.
Certainly do that. All right, Luke 2. Yeah, we did this one. It says, now we were in the same country, shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Yeah, we discussed the fact that this time of year over there, it's just about as cold as it is, in the Midwest. Not,
But one thing I want to mention, I was watching Aleppo and the evaluation of refugees from Aleppo, which apparently appears to be showing that the Russian-backed Syrians and the Iranian-backed Syrians are winning at the moment, at least. And there was snow on the ground, like 2 or 3 inches of snow as they were evacuating. And you realize Jerusalem is a higher altitude. That's why they always say up to Jerusalem or down from Jerusalem. And the higher up you go in altitude, the more snow or cold, icy rain you're likely to have. In the wintertime, in spite of what some people try to make excuses there, they say, well, you can have exceptions. And certainly you can have exceptions, but in the wintertime, you don't have sheep out in the field at night in the end of December. And the manger, I guess, was open. That's why Christ was in there. You have the sheep in the manger. But in the fall, especially like in September, the sheep would be outdoors. It would be empty and available for Christ because of the overcrowding. I mean, it makes perfect sense that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing too is wolves eat sheep, and if you're going to leave them out in the field all night during the winter, wolves get pretty thick, and they hunt. They have to hunt, and they hunt in the evenings a lot of the time or early mornings. So the sheep would be in more danger at that time during the winter. They would need to put them inside.
Yeah, the sheep and the wolves be more desperate to attack something, like you say. It's just not logical, and all the commentaries agree that's not what they did. Even if somebody can say, well, every now and then in late December you could have moderate weather. Yeah, I suppose anything is possible, but that really is just trying to.
Let me pose a question. How do we respond to somebody that says, well, I know all that's true, but that's not why I do it?
They do it because they love the baby Jesus. Is that how they put it?
Well, they'll say that, or they'll say, well, that's how my family's done it. We had to pick a day to worship, so we just picked that one. And of course I say, well, he gave you 52 basic ones, and then he gave you 7 more on top of that 52. So you got 59 that you could worship him a lot more often and a lot closer to how Jesus did it. And of course, then they look at me like I have to have 2 heads. I had this conversation last night with several of my students, and there's a lady in there who is, she's actually my physical therapist, and she believes what we do, and she just interrupted me, and she said, looked me right in the eye, trying to tell me to shut up, I think. She goes, they don't understand. And I go, I know, but let's talk about that. And so I went on, and she said, and again, they don't understand. Until God opens their mind, they're not going to hear you. And she was trying very nicely to hint that at me, but I wasn't going to take the hint because I couldn't stop myself. But but
here's the best example I've ever heard of how you can describe it. I read, the guy wrote an article a few years back. Imagine your wife comes up to you and says, I want to celebrate your birthday. I want to make it a big deal. We're going to make it a whole day, maybe several days leading up to your birthday. It's going to be wonderful. But we're not going to celebrate it on your birthday. We're going to celebrate it on my ex-boyfriend's birthday. All right, I'm going to celebrate your birthday, but we're going to do it on my ex-boyfriend's birthday, and we're going to celebrate, and I'm going to decorate the house with memorabilia from him when we dated, and and I'm going to cook you his favorite meal. And that's how we're going to handle your birthday. But basically, it's going to be about my ex-boyfriend. So when you put it in that context, that might help them understand a little bit about what you're doing, because you're doing, none of this has to do with Christ. Everything you sing about, the three kings of Orient don't exist. All this stuff you sing about and yell and holler, or not yet, but you know, these things you praise and celebrate, almost none of it's in the Bible, but you do it anyway. But you say, well, because I say it's about the baby Jesus, it's okay. But would you feel the same way if your wife was celebrating your birthday on her ex-husband's or ex-boyfriend's birthday and dressed in the clothes that she wore when she dated him and did all these things when she was hanging out with this former husband or boyfriend of hers? How would you feel about that? That's kind of a way to put it in context for them.
And I'll give that a shot and see how it works. Well,
we'll see. But it brings it home a little more.
Right.
It brings it home.
It makes it personal. But
yeah.
Shouldn't we have a personal relationship with God and Jesus Christ? And my thing, what I told him last night, I said, if you're going to be Christ-like, that's what a Christian means. It means you have to do what Christ did. And Christ didn't do these things. In fact, he said not to do these things. And if you know who Christ is, you have to know who he was. In Christianity is the oldest religion because Christ was the God that said, let us make man in our image. That is the God that became Jesus Christ. He's the one that gave us the 10 commandments. And he's also the one that inspired Isaiah to write Isaiah 10, 2 through 5. And so if you're going to be Christian, you should try to do what he did. And he didn't do these things. And he had no part of paganism. And in many places it talks about, the things that Christ hates is a lie. And lumping his name on this pagan day is blasphemous. I said, and they all were looking at me. And then that's when Jen starts going, they are not going to understand.
It all goes back to we can decide whether or not we will worship Christ and our God and Christ. We do not get to decide how we do it. We're told how to. We get to decide whether or not we'll do it that way.
I had a woman tell me she would give up her place in the kingdom for Christmas.
Really?
She literally said that. The same one that demanded I take the present last year.
She has no idea what she's saying.
Just, other than that, I like her.
Well, she sounds very likable. Speaking of the how, there's some people who have said, well, the one thing you can give Christmas credit for, look in the Bible, the three kings gave gifts. So gift giving is definitely biblical. And what they don't understand is the gifts came a little bit after Christ was born, but also the gifts were not exchanged among the three kings or anybody else. They were giving gifts to a king. And that was in the Near East and the Far East and many other places. That's a custom when a new king comes into the world, or you get to visit a king the first time, you bring gifts. They were giving gifts to the king, Jesus Christ, but it was not an exchange of gifts among each other. Because it's a minor thing, but it's something people don't understand either.
Well, looking at the scripture you just had on the screen, you can go a little further, and it talks about, you see these manger scenes, and there's the baby and Joseph and Mary, and then there's these shepherds, and then there's these three magi or wise men. And that didn't happen at all. First of all, we've established it's too cold for that to happen to begin with at that time. But these magi, M-A-G-I, the wise men, could have even been Zoroaster's, believers in Zoroaster religion at the time. However, they didn't arrive in Bethlehem for after a journey of months, maybe 2 after the birth of Christ, because if you study Matthew chapter 2 very carefully, Herod would not have risked killing all the little boys from 2 years old and younger if he'd known the Christ child was a mere week or 2 old. because he had carefully interrogated these fellows about the time the star had appeared, and they came into a house, not a manger, where they saw the young child, not here called a baby or an infant, with Mary, his mother. And so it's just another example of the ignorance of people, or the unwillingness of people to actually crack open a study and see exactly whether it is pagan or it is Christian. Because, okay, fine, I believe in all this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Question to ask them is this: well, okay, but does it make any difference to God? So that's what you better be concerned about. Not whether you like it or not, but does it make any difference to God? And you ought to study it out for yourself and then make your decision. And that's where I leave it. But these magi didn't come for but a year, maybe two, and came to their home, not to a manger.
And even if it were a couple of months afterwards, whichever way, the logical thought is they had to go to their family's birthplace to pay the tax, because that's the whole point of it. There's a certain date. Once the tax was collected and paid, people went back to wherever they were, and then Joseph and Mary didn't have to be in the manger. They could go rent a house, because most of the mob or crowds for tax purposes would go. And so they were back in the house, and it's all, as I said, it was gifts to a king. It wasn't a birthday gift exchange. It was a gift to a king. Mm-hmm. Here's something for people to keep in mind. Christmas is not in the Bible. The early church did not keep it.
Oh.
And it's just good to remember that. The one thing I do think we Christians need to keep in mind, I mean, we know the Bible more so, is that Mary does need to get a lot. Mary deserves probably a little more attention from us than she gets. The only time Mary is mentioned by most people is at Christmas. But really, I think Mary is one of the greatest saints of that first century group of people. And I don't know, well, anyway, there's a lot of good things can be said about Mary, and I just want to, but if people put her in the mother and child pagan imagery, they take away from the real flesh and blood human Mary and her accomplishments as one of the saints. And there's two other Marys that also were powerful, were important saints in the first century too. Mm-hmm. Why don't we move on to the next scripture? Why God doesn't want people getting involved with using pagan things for our worship of him.
All right, Deuteronomy 12, starting in verse 30. Take heed to yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them, after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates, they have done to their gods, for they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. And I think we might have covered this one too, but
well, it's worth mentioning though. Yep. God sees a negative influence spiritually by following the pagan world around us and not sticking with the Bible. And I feel that has happened to Israel more so than it should have, and maybe to America and Britain as well. We need to stay away from things that have a pagan tradition, because we look at it and we say, oh, what difference does it make? Nobody cares. Well, that's true. Humans don't care, but God cares.
God cares. Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that you want to be close to or not close to. And as we might have mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. As America gets further away from God spiritually and becomes more secular, and Christmas becomes just winter solstice celebration like it always was in the pagan days, Isn't it interesting that we're also killing more babies with abortion? And I've heard examples where what we would call good, normal people who think it's politically correct, so they have to be pro-abortion. If you tell them about partial birth abortion and how graphic and ugly it is, they don't want to hear it.
There was someone last year that had a video. And they were walking around like the man on the street thing, and they were asking people about it, and they were going, well, I think, and they had their reasons that they thought under some circumstances. And then he showed them the video, and the look on their face when they saw what they were actually doing, they were sickened in their stomach, because they have no idea what it is. They have no idea what's being done to that baby. And when they get out and they'll throw their life and name and sacred honor on the line for something like abortion, and then not even know what it actually is. And I think that's the other part of this. People are not educated. People don't read their Bible and say, where did these customs come from? They just jump on whatever the movie stars are saying, whatever the school teachers have taught them, whatever their friends are saying, and they really don't know what they're talking about.
That video you talked about, that is why if you go to Planned Parenthood, best of my knowledge, from what I've heard, there are no sonograms at Planned Parenthood. You cannot get a sonogram at Planned Parenthood. They do not want you to see the child.
And there's a theory that if you see the baby, you're less likely to have the abortion.
And that's why they fight legislation when, some local, states or local, they try to make laws saying that you must have a sonogram before, you have an abortion and things like that. They fight it. They fight it because they don't want you to see it. The more you're in the dark, the more they keep your eyes shrouded, the more they can get away with, and the more they can convince people it's okay.
One good thing about this election, at least I think it's good, one of the issues that came out in the debate was abortion. And they say 83% of the evangelical Christians voted for the anti-abortion candidate. Let's assume that that's true. I believe it is true. At least that shows that there's a slight, maybe 51% of Americans are starting to turn their back on abortion. I consider that a good trend. I mean, I wish it were bigger, but that is at least something. Mm-hmm. In spite of all the politically correct pressure, which is really out there.
Something I thought about when a person shoots another person, kills another person, self-defense in the military as a law enforcement officer, whatever, that changes that person's inside. It changes them a little bit, and they're never going to be who they were before that. Imagine having an abortion and actually killing your child. You either are so dead before that it can't change you because you're already dead, or it changes you and kills part of you that cannot be redeemed. And that's another reason why they push that, because it hurts the would-be mother. It damages her forever.
It certainly makes sense. I've heard of stories on the radio where a lady aborted a baby 10 years ago and thought she'd have plenty of kids, but for whatever reason, never had another kid. And then she'd be at a picnic with some of her cousins and other relatives, and they'd have a 10-year-old child, the age of the one that she killed, and she would get hit like with an emotional sledgehammer, wondering, what if I had not aborted that child?
Murder is murder.
And no one ever thinks about that, but I believe that it can happen to some people, that regret, because that's a regret you can never walk away from if you're in that situation.
Well, every sin you do changes you a little bit. The first lie you tell, the first little piece of candy you sneak out of the store, every little sin changes you. It makes you just a little worse, a little dirtier. And then little by little, it becomes what you are and who you are. I had a boss one day, it told me, a doctor called, he said, tell him I'm not here. I said, but you're standing right there. He goes, well, just tell him. I said, I'm not a liar. And he said, it's a white lie. I said, okay, let me get this straight. You want me to lie to him, so it's okay with you that I lie, because then I'll lie to you, I'll lie about you, then I'm just a liar. So what do you want? What kind of employee you want? You want just a liar for an employee? He did not like that, so I ended up quitting.
Yeah. You know, there is one solution for what you were talking about. Repent and be baptized.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you can repent. All those people that aborted a ton of babies, you can repent of that like any other sin. Let's go to our next slide. We're still just looking at the whole point about how God looks at all these things. We just want to think about that a little bit.
1 Corinthians 10, verse 20, rather that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to have fellowship with demons.
While we're not putting Christmas in exactly that category, maybe that could be debated, but the point is, in principle, when Paul was writing to the Corinthians, now, you know, there are many that could eat the meat and ignore where it came from, and Paul was okay with that. But he says, be careful that you don't get involved with the pagan sacrifices and the pagan temples, you know, in the same way the pagans were, because you're getting closer to the evil spiritual world. And we just need to be careful and realize that there is an evil spiritual world. We can't see it and feel it or taste it. But the closer you are to worldly pagan things, you're moving in that, at least you're moving in that direction. I'm not saying it's as bad as the temples that Paul talked about in Corinth, but, you know, we want to move in the right direction spiritually.
Well, you know, if you read Romans 1, it goes through all these different things, and at the end it says not only those who practice these things, but those who accept them. This is a sacrifice. In my opinion, Christmas is a sacrifice to a false god, so I don't accept that.
By the way, if you talk about Christmas spirit, there are a lot of ways of looking at that. You can look at that as something out of a bottle. But here's something that I talked to one deputy sheriff, it was a few years back, about what happens on most Christmases. And here's what the deputy sheriff said. Most Christmases result in higher levels of drunkenness. And that goes back to the European pagan connection. And people have such high expectations of love and warmth. And when those expectations aren't fulfilled, which is most likely, there's more depression, delusion, and extreme materialism, which is hyped by all the many commercials. That violates the spiritual principle of the 10th commandment about coveting. And I'll just give you my background. That's a big deal. Maybe there were some family circumstances that made it worse, which I won't go into. But while some of my more upper class neighbor kids had all these fabulous toys and stuff, you know what I got for Christmas? Underwear, socks. Can you imagine, you know, with the normal covetous bad little kid, can you imagine how I hated that? Like, But that's what coveting does for you. Violates the principle of the 10th commandment. Christmas doesn't have a lot of spiritual depth. It appeals to the greedy nature. And here's what goes up Christmas most of the time. More identity theft, domestic violence, you know, husband and wives beating on each other, counterfeiting, shoplifting. I worked at one department. Well, it was an office building, but next to a big department store on the inner south side of downtown Chicago. I forgot the exact name they called it. Because that time of year was night when a lot of the ladies who worked there got off the job, they would give them instructions about how to hold their purses tight, what to do and what not to do, because a lot of purse snatching, and they would say things like, well, if a guy comes up to you and, you know, he threatens you, grabs your purse, don't hold. A lot of women would hold their purse with a kind of a fear frozen grip because they're frightened, and they would get beat seriously, maybe even beaten to death. You know, and this was what we instructed the female employees to be concerned about during that Christmas season was shoplifting, purse snatching, scams, vehicle theft, robbery, drunk driving, rape, sexual assaults, and burglaries more than any other time of year.
I think the part of town you're talking about now they refer to as Chirac, Chicago and Iraq. That's what they refer to it as. Because there were more murders at one time in that part of Chicago than Iraq. So they call it Chirac.
Iraq.
And the thing about it was, it wasn't in the worst part of the South Side. It was like, you have downtown Chicago, Miracle Mile, then a little bit further south, and just maybe 10 blocks further south, you have the edge of the department stores and certain office buildings with big parking lots. Well, that was in the danger zone. I guess maybe it was dangerous everywhere, but that was even the more danger zone. And all these women coming out at night at work with their purses were in a lot of danger during the Christmas season. It's unfortunate, but it is I guess Chirac is worse now, but it was bad then too. This is like, well, I'm old. This many, many, many years ago.
You were talking about the pagan aspects of this, and one thing we haven't discussed and kind of gone through that we just assume everybody understands is all the things that are a part of Christmas. The lights on the trees, the bulbs that are hung from the trees, the mistletoe, the Yule log. I don't know. There's probably another 20, 30 things. Every single one of these things that people partake in all originate from the pagan Christmas that goes back to, firstly traces back to Germany, then jumps back to Nimrod and Babylon. All this stuff can be traced. Now it took a few changes over the years, and it maybe was transformed from one thing a little bit to another, but all the symbolism and intent is there, and almost every bit of Christmas, in fact, except for where they put Jesus into it, everything else is pagan to the core. And it's sick if you look it up. So look for the origins of why the bulbs hang on the Christmas tree. Look for the origins. Good on Google. You can find out anything nowadays. Look for the origin of the Christmas tree, the origin of mistletoe, the Yule log. Wikipedia is a great source for this kind of stuff, or a dictionary, or there's all kinds of online. Help me out. But anyway, it's out there. Encyclopedia, online encyclopedias. So it's all out there. It's all available. Look it up. It's simple. So if you doubt it, almost everything you participate in has a pagan origin. Even the gift giving, it was taken, I think, before they added it to Christ. All they did was, in 325, was insert Christ into a completely, utterly right with pagan holiday and called it Christmas. That's it.
Well, would you put up the next slide? And while I realize people could argue that these things are a little different, maybe a little different, but the principle is the same.
Is it so different that it's okay? I don't think so. I wouldn't want to live on the difference of what this is and what a Christmas tree is. Jeremiah 10:5. It says, "They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried, because they cannot go by themselves. They do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good."
And the next slide too. Just might as well get them all out there a little bit.
All right, 7:18. "The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger." Well, who's the Queen of Heaven? Who was the Queen of Heaven? Was that
Semiramis?
Semiramis. I think, wasn't Isis one of the different, as you go down the line?
Yeah, that's another name for it. I believe as languages evolved and things, they had different names in Egypt and in Babylon and in Greece and in Rome. So it might confuse you, but the mother and child, a lot of that stuff comes from the Queen of Heaven, which comes out of Babylon.
That is the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, the French gave it to us, and it probably has that same look. Yes, I wouldn't doubt it. Some people even argue that George Washington's, the upright obelisk, that Washington's monument, looks similar to some pagan ones in Europe. Not that I'm fighting over the thing. I'm just saying there's a lot of pagan tradition that people got out of Europe. Even something like Santa Claus. Now, Coca-Cola commercialized it and made him look kind of cute, nice, and jolly. But if you went back a few centuries in Europe, Santa Claus was something they used with kids. If you're nice, he'll give you good things. If you're naughty, then you're in trouble. So it was kind of nice and scary. Well, all of that, those come from the deep forest of Europe, not so much from the Bible. Actually, nothing from the Bible. And commercialism and American commercialism.
And if you see the old drawings of what they called Saint Nick or Santa Claus or however he's kind of a creepy dude, You wouldn't let him in your car to take him down the road, It's kind of a creepy looking, skinny, scrawny, guy.
Scare those kids into behaving kind of thing. And I know that Coke has jollied him up, I believe it's in the 1930s, to his current chubby, happy appearance. And that's, commercialism is a good thing. There's one more part of Christmas that I think would be worth mentioning. By the way, it's not wrong to give to charities like the Salvation Army, because charity is always good. But in 1776, when the American Revolution started, Great Britain was the superpower of the planet. And they hired some German mercenary soldiers to add to their superpower status. King George brought a huge fleet, like 350 battleships with tons of very professional soldiers, well equipped. They fought the first decisive big battle in Manhattan, New York. Washington's army was easily defeated. And a Dunkirk-like miracle, the British kind of held off, finished them off that night. They left some campfires and make the British think they were still there. And they escaped with fog and little boats into New Jersey. The British followed, and defeat after defeat, they pushed the American colonial army further and further south. Further and further south until, winter came and they crossed the Delaware River. And it looked to most of the public like the British Empire was too powerful. The American Revolution had no chance. George Washington needed a miracle to save the revolution. Because the colonists, having a Puritan background, even if they weren't all Puritans, they didn't keep Christmas. They thought it was too rowdy, unbiblical. And so on Christmas, George Washington, and you'll see all those pictures of him crossing the ice-flow Delaware River. We saw a bunch of those rivers coming back from Kansas City. Missouri River, big ice chunks floating on it. Well, that's where the pictures are. And they rode all their army across and obviously surprised the Haitians, who were drunk or hungover. It was a relatively easy surprise victory. But that victory gave the publicity that was the spark for public opinion to shift. And people said, the British are not unbeatable. Washington got many volunteers and supplies. And of course, the war went on, and ultimately Washington and the American colonial army won. On that basis, you could argue that because America did not keep Christmas in its early colonial beginning, that may have saved, not keeping Christmas may have saved the American Revolution.
Possible. Mm-hmm. Well, this Christmas we're talking about here, it kind of boils down to me that Satan, of course, Satan is the great counterfeiter, and that goes all the way back to he's the one that started it, because he's the arch deceiver who go to he'll go to any lengths to deceive and mislead people, and God's people, because he knows the old adage that a miss is as good as a mile. And because the word for sin means to miss the mark. Because if you took and just cut one little slash across the smile of that Mona Lisa painting, that'd be enough to destroy it, wouldn't it? And if you put just a little bit of poison in an otherwise great steak dinner, it could kill you, just a little bit. But if people miss the mark in observing purely pagan customs like Christmas with pagan mystical symbols and then say, oh, but call it Christian, the devil is satisfied, for he's duped the people into committing sin against God, missing the mark of the pure worship of Creator God by doing the opposite of what he's commanded. He said, don't learn the way of the heathen, so we live the lie of the heathen in the country. So Satan is very happy at this time of year as he dupes people and just keeps them downtrodden with the pagan false religions that dominate the world today.
By the way, we probably have finished the Christmas topic pretty well. And since we don't have time to finish it, we're going to do the 10 kings and which ones are iron, which ones are clay. We're going to do that next Friday. The 10 kings that are mentioned in Daniel and Revelation next time. But I want to just mention anything on the world news that you all think is significant that we ought to mention before we call it quits.
Well,
United Nations and Israel.
yeah, exactly. That's where I was going.
Go ahead.
United Nations, John, the United Nations vote where we abstained, like the weasels that we have become in our government,
Yeah.
and the incoming administration has a complete opposite view of Israel. It's going to be interesting to see how the world receives that, because they definitely don't want to see it. I mean, the whole world just about hates that view, hates that respect of Israel of any kind, and we're bringing that in, in the next administration. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yes, it will.
Right. And if we move our, well, you know what?
Embassy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, our embassy, but someone else was saying, a friend of mine on Facebook was saying that same thing caught his attention. What happens? We move our embassy to Jerusalem. Now, how does that push forward possibly the building of another temple? Once they have our full backing, they know that the United States is fully on their side, and they don't have to worry about the world pushing against them if we're backing them. How more bold do they become about building a temple?
One thing to consider, Trump has nominated a very religious Jew, Friedman from New York, to be the ambassador to Israel. And he's been criticized by the New York Times for being too religious, whatever that means. Now, I don't guarantee that means what America will or won't do, but that is if I were Israel, I'd take that as a very positive sign. Also, Trump's daughter is married to a Jewish man. All of that, if I were Israel, as a positive thing,
As I understand it, his daughter converted to Judaism as well.
Yes.
Yeah, the children are being raised Jewish too. That's what I heard.
I think that Trump has done a lot of business with Jewish people, and I think he respects their ability to do business and and make wise decisions. I think that he respects that, and I think that maybe it's a part of why he's being more open to Israel.
If you want to just make an argument, and there are prophecies that say this will happen someday, when 10 men will hold on to it's in Zechariah, a Jewish man's hem of his garment and say, show us the way. But if the Middle Eastern countries around Jerusalem just did business with the Jewish community and kind of got involved with their commercial clubs, that whole region would be much more prosperous, even without foreign aid. I mean, just on businesses instead of using most of their energy to attack Israel. I understand, religious animosity and hatred and all that, but I'm just saying they would be better off if they worked with Israel. They'd all be better off. But I know that's not going to happen, so I have no illusions of that.
Nope, not at all.
Well, I guess that's the main thing. Israel looks like they may have a friend in America now that, well, that may, at least if America becomes stronger militarily and our support for Israel is stronger, that would give them a little more safety in doing whatever they want to do.
Yeah, yep, it sure would. And especially if, well, another thing we're seeing in the news is the move to the right in Europe. I wish I would have pulled that article up where someone in Germany, some higher official or something, said that it's basically war against the Islamic State right now because of where they're at. Where we just had that bus attack or that truck attack over there. But they're steadily moving further and further to the right, and they're getting real tired of these people coming in from other countries and killing them and running their country. And they're over there in other people's country now, harassing Christians. And we know what we think about Christmas, but they're upsetting all their Christmas traditions. And that's how they see that this is destroying their culture, and they're pushing back.
There was a man on Fox, I think yesterday, that said there are parts of northern England that there are so many Muslim people that the women don't get to come out of the house and they don't see sunlight. They don't learn to read or write. They're just property of the men. And somehow that's been legal. It's legal in these areas.
The no-go zones.
Apparently.
Yeah, there's a bunch of no-go zones over there.
Yeah, the world, it is kind of scary what is happening in the no-go zones. And I talked to a German man the other day, and he was just saying, we were talking about the German language. We started talking about the election. He's hoping that Angela Merkel will not win because he says Berlin's population jumped about 25% in 1 year, almost all young Muslim men, and it's causing a real crisis in Berlin. And the government and the media do not want to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So we should be fortunate that hopefully that won't happen here, at least not for a while. Well, anyway, next weekend we can get together and discuss the 10 Kings. And I think there's some interesting things going on in Europe and the world that will lend itself for a nice, better understanding of certain scriptures and keeping our eye out for the future.
Sounds good.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.